Hey everyone. So I'm going to just be presenting our lecture for this week. Actually, this is going to be for the next 2 weeks. We're going to be focusing on this man right here, Adolf Hitler, and how he used the four totalitarian methods of control in Germany to lead to the Holocaust. That's going to be the focus of what we're talking about in the next 2 weeks and the kind of work that you're going to be doing. You guys are going to be looking at some sources that actually show how Hitler used the four methods of control. But I want to talk to you guys about how this man actually rose to power in Germany. And so that is our plan for today. This should be about 15 minutes. And make sure you're just continuing your notes on the same page. So, just to talk to you guys a little bit about who this man was, Adolf Hitler kind of experienced a series of just sort of frustrations and failure in his early life. He actually was an aspiring artist. You guys can see a H in the corner of his paintings. This one is cut off here a little bit. But he was actually an artist. And if you look at the pictures, not a terrible artist. He was very interested and passionate about painting and art, and he applied 3 times to an art school in Vienna, and 3 times was rejected. So a lot of people talk about how if only, right? Kind of like moments in history where it's like, well, if only he got accepted into art school, how might things have been different? But he was rejected. He was frustrated by that rejection. He struggled to find sort of jobs here and there. But then Germany entered World War I, and so he enlisted as a soldier, volunteered in the German army. That grand, large, impressive, powerful army that I told you about in our previous unit. uh, he became a part of that, and he actually fought very valiantly during World War I. He actually earned a series of medals for his bravery. This is also where he got his iconic mustache because you know that they started to use chemical warfare during World War I, and he felt that his mustache, which extended kind of past his lips, um, that the gas mask was actually like his mustache was getting in the way of it and it was irritating. And so he cut his mustache real thin right underneath his nose. And there you have his iconic look, forever ruined male facial hairstyle. Um, anyway, World War I comes to an end. He comes home and again sort of finds himself in this like, well, where do I go now? And he ends up joining up with the Nazis after World War I, which was a very right-wing group, falls in line with the fascism that we were talking about before. And you guys know the struggles that Germany was facing after World War I. And so he kind of falls in with this group that was promising security and sort of blaming um, Jews for the problems that Germany was facing. And we'll dive into that in a second. So Hitler quickly, he was actually a very effective speaker. He would start off very quietly, kind of draw people in, and then get to a point where his like veins were bursting almost. But he was a very effective speaker. He was relatively charismatic, and he actually quickly rises in the Nazi Party, and it becomes the leader, or der Führer, which is what is he is referred to. Führer is just the German word for leader. So Hitler and the Nazi Party actually try to take over Munich. They actually try to mimic what Benito Mussolini did in Italy, taking over in Italy with his black shirts. He tries to take over Germany, tries to take over Munich first, and they're promptly caught and he is sent to jail. And it is his time in jail where he really sits on and thinks through his sort of plan for Germany. And he really stews in like his hatred um, the Treaty of Versailles, his hatred for the situation that Germany was in. And this is where he really starts to formulate a lot of his ideas, so much so that he actually writes Mein Kampf, which means my struggle. And he writes this book partially while he is in jail in Germany. The two main ideas that come from it are these ideas of race and space. So, race meaning he believed in this Aryan master race, this master race that was better than, superior than any other race in the world. And he believed that race needed space to inhabit, to live, to grow, to populate. And so, space needed to be made for that Aryan master race. So just remember those two concepts of race and space. And you guys can see he very well accomplishes that. If you look, this is actually the extent of Germany's control during World War II. So he really was trying to carve out what he said Lebensraum, meaning like elbow room for the Germans to, or the master Aryan race to expand and kind of like take over. It wasn't just Europe that he had plans for, though. He had plans for the entire world, but he wanted to start with Europe. So he's, a part of this sort of small, radical right-wing fascist party. And he's largely ignored, him and the Nazi Party are largely ignored until the Great Depression hits in the United States in 1929, beginning of 1930s, and it spreads worldwide. People start to pay attention to this party that is promising security, promising leadership, and quickly the Nazis become the largest, most powerful political party in Germany. So he kind of goes from this sort of like radical group to all of a sudden people are willing to sort of accept more radical ideas because they're frustrated with the failure of the economy, frustrated with the condition of the world, and they're looking for someone to blame. And the Nazis have the answer, or believe they have the answer. So in an interesting move, you guys, this is actually the president, von Hindenburg of Germany. He actually makes the decision to appoint Hitler to chancellor. So he appoints him to a very high position in the German government. And he did it because he assumed that he could control Hitler. He was like, if I give the Nazis this position, they'll be happy. And they won't push for more. Well, obviously, we know history. We can look back in time. The joke was on him because there was no way he was going to be able to control Hitler. So Hitler is kind of like given this position and he quickly takes over Germany. Actually, interestingly enough, somebody warned the president, many people warned the president, but they were like, there's no way you're going to be able to control this rabble rouser, is what they called him. And they were right. And Hitler quickly moves from chancellor to becoming the Führer of the entire Third Reich, which is sort of like the new Germany that Hitler creates. So I want to talk to you about the four methods of control that Hitler, as soon as he came to power, that he used. And Auschwitz, you guys know, is one of the most famous death camps from the Holocaust. And so this quote I think is really interesting because it says the road to Auschwitz was built by hate but paved with indifference. So we're going to look at both of those things today, both the hate that was in place by the Nazi Party and also the indifference, or sort of the ways that the German populace and the world, it wasn't just Germany, sort of turned a blind eye to the mistreatment of an entire group of people. And a lot of what happens kind of on this road to the Holocaust centers around anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is just the word for hatred towards Jews. And like I said, people in Germany were looking for someone to blame, and they blamed the Jews for Germany's problems post World War I. So let's talk about the four methods of control. You had police terror, which obviously we've talked about before. Hitler used two um, specific police forces. He had his Gestapo and he had his Schutzstaffel. His Schutzstaffel, you guys might be familiar with the SS. The sort of, it almost looks like two lightning bolts next to each other. The SS were his secret police. They were the ones that sort of carried out his orders. They were generally like pretty high up. And they were the ones that would take care of any like political opponents that Hitler might have. And they were the ones that offered him like physical protection. And then you had your Gestapo. Your Gestapo were the Nazis that were on the ground. They were the ones that were, um, patrolling the streets. They were the ones that were looking for Jews that were hiding in homes. They were the ones that you guys are going to look in the sources that you look at, would carry out random acts of violence to kind of keep people on their toes. Like they were given license or given the power to just pretty much arbitrarily choose, who were like sort of deemed enemies of what Germany was doing. And their sort of goals. So Hitler used his police terror. The police terror is so essential because of this element of fear. Guys, the fact that his police were able to instill fear both made people fall into line, but also discouraged anybody from trying to resist because of the fear that you would be subject to capture or death or whatever might have happened if you didn't fall in line with what Hitler did. And so the fear police terror is so important because it's what makes people kind of fall in line and not want to step out of that line that you've created. Indoctrination. So obviously, you guys, there's a huge focus on youth. Hitler had two organizations. He had Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls. So Hitler Youth, that was him training the next generation of Nazi soldiers, pretty much. Indoctrinating them, teaching them about stereotypes towards Jews, how to identify a Jew. We'll look at that in a second. Teaching them, skills for the military, trying to prepare them to be a part of the Nazi party when they grew up. He had these huge rallies where he would come and speak, and he'd have prominent Nazi members speak to these children and young men and boys. And then the League of German Girls, it was similar, a lot of focus on physical fitness for these German girls, but they were constantly just told how important their role was in being mothers and raising children to be loyal to Hitler. And so it was being as physically fit so that you could have the most physically fit children, this is just, it's furthering the master race. And that's what these girls, the kind of focus was for them. I want to show you guys these two books. You had Der Giftpilz, or the poisonous mushroom is what it means in German. This is the cover of the book. It was written by a man named Erzheimer. As you guys can see, the poisonous mushroom, they use these kind of stereotypes and the Star of David here to identify the Jew. And obviously they're trying to say that the Jew is the poisonous mushroom. This is one of the pages from the books that you're going to look at in class, talking about, it's literally a class teaching students, German students, how to identify a Jew with sort of some of these like damaging, harmful stereotypes. And then Trust No Fox was also, so these are two of the most popular children's books in Germany at the time. Trust No Fox, this is just one page from it where it's comparing the German to the Jew. And obviously, you guys, it's not, they literally have a shirtless man of like a strong German farmer. And then this they're making him look like a banker, kind of, overweight, balding, just not a flattering picture. And sort of just like always just, it's us versus them, sort of that comparison. And these are children's books, you guys. These are books that kids are reading. And it's just furthering that sort of, I guess, brainwashing for the next generation. Um, Ethnic persecution was absolutely, it was rampant in Germany when the Nazis took over. There's a few things that they did just to, kind of solidify their power and place the blame fully on somebody else. And that's what a lot of the focus of the Nazi Party was, placing the blame somewhere else. So Jews are forced to wear the Star of David as a way to identify them. And the only reason you would need to identify somebody is if you're trying to, if they're being targeted for whatever reason. So they were subject to a series of stricter and stricter laws. These are called the Nuremberg laws. And they start off, laws about like no intermarriage, laws about losing your citizenship to Germany just based on if you're a Jew or not. And then they intensify as the years go on. They intensify to include, that you are not allowed to do business. You're not allowed to walk on the sidewalks. You are, just they intensify just to make life more and more and more difficult for Jews to live in Germany. The goal was to, and as you guys can see here, also a part of that was eventually actually removing the Jews and forcing them to go live in ghettos, which were just sectioned off, blocked off, walled off areas where Hitler initially thought he could move the Jews there. He didn't allow any medicine. He didn't allow any, he allowed very scarce amounts of food. And the goal, in his mind, was just let them sort of die off, or let them leave because of how miserable these Nuremberg laws are. Well, that becomes a problem because, as we'll talk about, Hitler keeps conquering more and more land. And so as the Jews try to flee, it becomes increasingly difficult for them to do so. And we'll talk about how other nations also shut their doors to the Jews. A classic example of this ethnic persecution was Kristallnacht, which took place in 1938. This is the German word for the Night of Broken Glass, because Hitler authorized, through Heinrich Himmler, who was his chief of police, he gave an order that Germans could attack Jewish homes and businesses. And so this night they broke into homes, businesses, broke the glass, looted stores, and they were allowed to do it. It was like the law encouraged them to. It's known as the Night of Broken Glass because when you woke up the next day, there just were streets lined with all the broken glass from all the shops that they had raided. Here's a picture of the ghettos where the Jews were forced to live initially. Later on, they're loaded onto carts and taken to the death camps or labor camps, concentration camps, and we will talk about that in a separate lecture. And then the last one, you guys, is propaganda and censorship. So just images that really showed Jews in a very negative light, whereas Hitler is shown in a very positive light, right? So literally heaven is smiling down on this leader, right? You have your two perfect, League of German Girls and Hitler Youth, whereas here you guys can see these hands sort of uniting against this enemy is what they're calling him. He started the war, right? This is painting Jews in a terrible light, and that's what the propaganda would play on stereotypes. Just imagine being surrounded by this 24/7, and these are the messages you're always getting, right? It's going to get into your head, and it's going to make you start to believe. I told you guys propaganda and censorship sort of work together. So Hitler had these massive rallies where he would sort of organize people just to sort of like stir up the fervor and excitement for his rule. And then He also ordered book burnings. You guys can see this happened all over the place, especially any books that were written by Jewish authors. They burned books, anything that was anti German or pro Jew or written by a Jew. And then any opposition was silenced. We'll talk about where they were taken, but any opposition was either killed or taken to the camps, and we'll talk about that in just a second. This is a game where pretty much you were encouraged to just listen to state radio stations, which were pretty much like the radio stations that were controlled by Hitler. And if you went to the ones that were not, then you would lose points. This is Der Stürmer, which was a newspaper ran by Julius Streicher, and you're going to actually look at a source by him in the packet. This newspaper was like just raged against the Jew. And this is a popular, well-read newspaper in Germany. And then the final thing I want to talk about, you guys, is sort of like that opposition and who Hitler targeted. So you had political prisoners. This is actually a group. They called themselves the White Roses. These are actually German kids, teenagers, that were just so shocked and fed up and disgusted by what Hitler was doing that they tried to resist, and they published pamphlets talking about what Hitler did. And like I said, Hitler had his police terror that eliminated opponents, and so they were actually arrested and executed. This is just a few of them, but other political prisoners were taken to um, camps. Dachau was actually one of the first places that political prisoners were taken to. If you were a political opponent, somebody that was fit into the perfect kind of master race, but you didn't fall in line, you were given this red triangle. The purple triangle was for Jehovah Witnesses, and then the pink striped or the pink triangle were men that were suspected to be homosexual. And the reason, even if they fit into this, German Aryan master race, if they were homosexual, Hitler's thought process was that they were not contributing to furthering this master race, and so they should be labeled as such. So all these different types of people that just didn't fit into Hitler's kind of like ideal vision were placed in concentration camps. And just so you guys can see another sort of one of the propaganda pieces that you saw, this literally says that it was kind of like how much money was spent on caring for people that were not mentally, in Hitler's mind, not mentally capable. So he's saying handicapped people. We spent this much money, and this is how much money we spent on improving our country. So his goal was to kind of say, hey, if we could eliminate this, we could spend and devote more of it to improving our country. So you guys can see just how damaging some of these messages were. So those, you guys, those are the 4 ways that Hitler used the methods of control, and we'll talk about sort of how that leads to the Holocaust later on next week. So use this information to help you analyze your sources in your source packet.